Good morning. Today is the 12th of May. It is International Nursing Day. Now, for all nursing staff who've given their best in the fight against the epidemic, I would like to pay out my tribute to them. Now, they have been working like a nightingale. They have, certainly given play to the nightingale spirit. They have been working hard at the front line, at hospitals, at quarantine centers, even at homes for the elderly. All the nursing care staff have been actively working to fight the epidemic. So on this day, the International Nursing Day, I would like to pay my tribute to them. Now, I would like to take a bit of time on the progress in our effort to preserve jobs. About a month ago, on the 8th of April, I announced that given the dire situation of our economy, we have launched an employment support scheme. And I'm grateful to the Finance Committee of the Legislative Council for speedily approving the total funding on the in April. So there are $8 billion for the employment support scheme. Now, the ESS is to give wage subsidy to eligible employers so they're able to keep their staff and make sure we keep our strength. And it's hoped that by preserving jobs, we're able to counter the waves of employment and massive layoffs. So we hope very much the employers and will work together with the employees to tide over this tough time. Now, since the announcement of the ESS, it's been welcomed by employers and employees. Of course, employees have expressed certain concerns. We've heard them. And then from employers, I heard that especially for SMEs, since the government is going to give them a hand, they will, wait and see a bit longer. In other words, without the ESS in the past month, we might have seen more businesses having closed down or layoffs. Now, after months of thrashing out the details, we've also talked to stakeholders, and we've listened to various views. We have more or less thrashed out the details of the ESS. The application will start on the 25th of May. For the first stage of applications that will cover June, July, and August, the application period is for 3 weeks. So that's for the phase 1, 3 months wage subsidy. Today, I'm going to give you the latest arrangement after we have, fine-tuned the scheme. Later on, the Secretary for Labour and Welfare and the head of PICO will be hosting a press briefing later on to give you more details about the ESS. Now, for anti-epidemic fund items, we've published a leaflet, and we have made it clear from the outset that all these items are for immediate relief. So for the ESS or for other items under the anti-epidemic fund, they must meet the following criteria. First, they must be easy and simple to understand. Secondly, application must be straightforward. And thirdly, funds must be dispersed quickly. And fourthly, the coverage should be as wide as possible so more individuals and businesses could benefit. Fifthly, this is to pave the way for the economic recovery later on. I am confident to say that after we have fine-tuned the details of the ESS, the scheme is better able to meet the 5 criteria I just mentioned. Now I'm going to talk about improvement measures. We want to help more employees to benefit from the ESS so they're able to keep their job. We are going to launch a series of enhancement measures. First of all, for employees above the age of 65 or above who do not need to make any MPF contribution, they were originally excluded from the ESS because they do not have to make contribution to MPF. So originally they did not fit the criteria. But for employees over the age of 65 who do not have to pay MPF, contribution, but they still keep an MPF account, then they will be covered by the ESS. You might ask, how come they don't need to make a mandatory MPF contribution, and how come they still keep an MPF account? Well, we understand there are about 60,000 elderly employees aged 65 or above. Employers do not need to make contribution on their behalf by law, but and the employees and employers could make a voluntary contribution, but of course their contribution may not be 5% as required by the law. But what we could see is there are 60,000 employees aged 65 or above who still have an MPF account, and their employers are still making contribution to their accounts. So for the first enhancement measure, we are talking about this batch of 60,000 employees aged 65 or above. The employers could still apply for the ESS subsidy for the employees. The terms remain the same: 50% of their wage, or $9,000 at most for a period of 6 months. The second enhancement measure is for two sectors left out of the ESS originally. Now, because for these two sectors, they have the relevant industry schemes, but there are very few employers under these industry schemes, because the nature of these industries is that they may not have, regular employees or employers. So that's why we have to set up industry-specific schemes to help the employees, and I'm talking about the catering industry and the construction industry. But again, after our detailed study, we find that for these two industries excluded from the ESS, they do have the so-called general employees under continuous employment. There are 12,000 such employees, involving some 5,000 employers. So we are going to include them in the ESS now. And we say what sort of employees are we talking about? Well, say for a construction company or eating business, they have many workers who do not make MPF pay contribution, and they are covered by the other schemes. But then maybe in a construction company there are engineers, or in a food factory there are also certain food engineers and so on. Then if, as I said, these employees are under continuous employment terms, then they will be covered by the ESS. Now, by including these additional employees, that will not affect the industry-specific schemes we've designed for the two sectors. So for other employees in those sectors, they will continue to get support under those two schemes. The third enhancement measure is about the self-employed. Now, our original proposal is that for the self-employed, between the 1st of November 2019 and the 31st of March 2020, these are self-employed persons must have an MPF account with contributions, and then they will receive $7,500 of one-off subsidy. But then for various reasons, maybe these self-employed people do have an MPF account, but they have not been paying contribution for some time. So with the enhancement measure, as at the 31st of March 2020 or before that, if a self-employed person has opened an MPF account, although there may not be contribution, if that account is not cancelled at the time of application, then the self-employed person could still apply for the $7,500 subsidy. So we believe there are about 215,000 self-employed persons who could benefit from this relaxation. The fourth, another enhancement measure is for the hardest hit industries or sectors. Now, when we asked him, you said we wanted flexibility, but at the same time we wanted to prevent abuse. So for the specified months for counting the salary, it will be a month in the past. At the time, it was suggested that between January and March 2020, an employer may choose any one of these 3 months that would best allow the employer to keep his staff. But then there are some sectors which have been the worst hit, such as the tourism sector. The tourism sector told us that by January 2020, business took a dip. So is it possible to push back further the specified months? So now we are saying that between December 2019 and March 2020, out of a total of 4 months, the employers may choose any one particular month that would best allow them to collect more subsidy and keep more staff. You might recall in December last year, the overall situation was slightly better. So that's why for certain sectors, they were still hiring staff. So those are the 4 enhancement measures after we have done further detailed studies. And now a second criteria is we said that the scheme must allow for easy application, so the money could go to the employers quickly and in turn to employees. This is to avoid layoffs. So that's why for the ESS, the application procedure is totally straightforward. Employers or the self-employed need only fill in an online application, and then they could authorize an agent to make so that the MPF trustee could provide the proof of MPF records, that is the MPF record certificates for the employer. Now the certificate would be issued directly by the MPF trustee with authorization from the employer, and then that MPF trustee becomes the agent for the ESS application. The agent could then give proof of the contribution records. In other words, the employer does not need to provide information on his own for his employees, because we've heard from employers expressing worry that maybe they have to dig into the past payment records of their staff, or they need to ask for any certificate from the MPF to do so. But we're now telling employers you don't need to do so, because employers don't need to provide any proof of salary payment that of their employees. Of course, then the employer does not need to pay any fee to the trustee. But then for MPF trustees, they will be providing MPF record certificate to the government. Of course, there will be some administrative work involved for the trustee, and the government will be paying for all the administrative fees. In other words, for employers applying for the ESS, is a straightforward process. You just need to fill in an online form to give authorization, and then you just sit there and wait for us to do the calculation. All the calculation will be done at the back office through our system. So it's hoped, therefore, we are able to make this scheme quick and easy to apply, and then there could be quick disbursements. Now, on quick disbursements, our estimate is that after an employer has put in an application, the calculated wage subsidy could be disbursed in 3 to 4 weeks. In other words, on day 1 of the application, that is the 25th of May, an employer puts in an application, then by end of June or in the second half of June, the employer should receive the wage subsidy from us. Now, this is an immense scheme. Some are concerned about loopholes. Well, we are doing our very best. So we don't want to go against the criteria I've mentioned, that is the scheme must be quick and easy, and then the disbursements are quick and easy, so we try to plug loopholes as far as possible. Now, after we have made the announcement, one loophole is that people started opening MPF accounts. But then for the stage 1 of the ESS, that is for June, July, and August, this is only for MPF accounts opened before the 31st of March 2020. Now, for MPF accounts opened after the 31st of March 2020, then these accounts are not eligible for the phase 1 of the ESS. But of course, for phase 2 of the ESS, we will we'll announce the details later. Now, for the ESS is for keeping jobs of employees. So when employers make an application, they must sign an undertaking on 2 points. One, as they receiving wage subsidy, they must not lay off any staff. And second, the full wage subsidy given by the government must be spent on paying the wages of employees. So we do have penalty mechanism. For example, the government could recover the part of the subsidy paid, or employees may even have to pay a fine. We believe these are reasonable and workable, and it won't be difficult to understand. Later on, Dr. Law will be giving you details in a technical briefing. Here, I would like to express my gratitude to all those involved in fleshing out the details of the ESS in the past month. They've been working so hard. That includes the MPF Authority, the Hong Kong Trustees Association, and the trustees and other trustees organizations. Now, there were other concerns expressed about the ESS. That is how arising from the ESS rather. That is for employees age 65 above who not making MPF contribution. How do we help them? And then at the same time, we also try to find out how many employees age 65 there are in Hong Kong and which industries they are in. So then we could give them help. Now, from the latest statistics, there are about 150,000 elderly employees in the working population in Hong Kong. We've looked at the industries they are in, and we'll try to make arrangement for them as far as possible. Now, I'll announce the announcement. First, as I mentioned just now, among the 150,000, 60,000 of these employees still keep an MPF account. It's because their employers previously made contribution, or the employees are still making voluntary contributions. So for these 60,000 employees age 65 above, they will be automatically included in the ESS. Secondly, now many of the elderly employees are drivers. Now, under the anti-epidemic fund, we have announced measures to help self-employed red minibus and taxi drivers. For this scheme, I am announcing today that it will be extended to cover drivers of green minibuses and the employees age 65 above in local ferry services. So they will enjoy the same wage subsidy as red minibus and taxi drivers. That is $6,000 of subsidy per month for a period of 6 months. Now, they have employers, of course, so the money will be handed over to the employers so the employees could keep their jobs. So the spirit is the same as ESS, but this is a measure specifically for other drivers who will now enjoy the same treatment as red minibus and taxi drivers. Now, there are about 3,200 drivers of green minibuses above the age of 65. So if we count also the drivers of red minibuses and taxis, there are in total 24,200 drivers who will receive assistance. And then another group is elderly employees in the catering industry. Now, when we made the announcement the first time, there is a specific industry-specific scheme to cover them. There are about 70,500 of them. The fourth industry is the laundry industry. Well, the industry was not covered by the anti-epidemic fund, and so we're going to have a new project or item under the anti-epidemic fund. We'll be giving one-off assistance to laundry shops, and the amount will depend on the scale of the business. Now, we will require the laundry businesses to take care of employees age 65 or above that they hire after they've received the assistance, and we expect we estimate there are about 2,000 of them. And then another group is outsourced workers of government, security guards and cleaning workers. We estimate there are about 10,000 employees age 65 in this group, but the jobs are secure because of our contract with the contractors. So these for employees age 65 above, the above measures cover already more than 110,000 employees age 65 above, in particular the grassroots employees. We believe, therefore, we are able to achieve our objective of preserving jobs. And there was about 30 to 40,000 employees left out of the 150,000 employees age 65 above. How many of who are they? About 8,000 of them are employers. Well, they're in the working population, but they are themselves employers. And then there are about 27,000 who are professionals. As you know, doctors work very hard in Hong Kong. They will still be working when they're 70 or 80. So for the 27,000 employees aged 65 above, these are the professionals. And the third type are those who work in subvented organizations such as health organizations or social welfare organizations. These are also elderly employees, but then their jobs are secure also because they're receiving subventions from the government. So we believe, therefore, our enhancement measures have answered the views expressed by various sectors in the past few months. We are now positively responding to all these views. Hopefully, on the 25th of May, when we launch the ESS, everything will go well. Now, I will take questions from the floor.
And may the press please state your organization and speak through your microphone. So report it in the middle row. Cable News. And just now, on your remarks on the general studies subject, and someone were deliberately spreading of false biased information on campuses. That's a serious allegation. So, what concrete proof do you have to prove your allegation, and or what kind of people are spreading of the false biased information according to you? So, do you think that so many young people taking the streets is due to the general studies instead of the governance? And you claim that you would like to have a overhaul of the general studies. So what are the details? And the police enforcement action on Sunday, and the public claimed that the police had abused a group gathering men and prosecuting them while they'll be walking the street themselves, and while a family prosecuted for going on a meal, and a reporter on news duties are claimed to breach of the ban. And is a police officer not familiar with the regulations, or they're abusing their power? Well, as some reporters were covering at Mong Kok were stopped and searched, and they were subject to retreatment by the police, and even requested them to kneel, and refusing to let the reporter clean themselves after being pepper sprayed. For this action targeting the press, besides the asking us to accommodate them, is what you so-called a respecting press freedom? Well, my support and the importance to education is plain for everyone to see. The first thing I'd assume offers is to provide new resource for the education sector. I promised that the recurrent expenditure of a new $5 billion, and warmly welcomed by the education sector. Well, we have spent over 10 billion of new resources into the sector. So education is very important to me. As due to my attach great importance to the education, I'm very, very concerned of the development in Hong Kong, because it's a work of establishing the character, and also train their moral and their intellectual abilities. I hope that we could only go for the better. So the education workers have a big task. So in this way, while pouring a lot of resources on the education sector, mainly on the headmaster and the teachers, ready for the more degree teachers and primary students, and also creating more headmaster position and expanding the establishment. As an education worker, they also have the duty to instill proper character in students. While I was interviewed, I will touch on a lot of subjects. On education, I mentioned that education is about gatekeeping. And I suppose I don't want to object to this. Well, it's Well, of course, we have a gatekeeping, especially for the government and the EDB, and the school sponsoring body, and the headmasters and teachers will also need to be the gatekeeper, whether it's for the academic system, exams, curriculum, and all need to be safeguarded. I don't mean to criticize what's wrong with our system. Over the past year, the community concern of education is quite noticeable. So to improve education is a common goal in our society. When I took office, I have set up a task force on 8 areas, and hopefully we can make improvements in education. And 6 of the task force has completed its work and already accept the recommendations and make improvements accordingly. One of them have yet to conclude their work, that is a task force on school curriculum. I believe the most controversial aspect would be the general studies. So in my interview, I undertook that within this year that the government will explain to the public on how do we address the prospect for the general studies. Unlike what the reporter just said, overhauling the general studies subject, I hope that the media should based on facts. So handling or addressing is very different from overhauling. I'm not finished yet. Well, it depends what kind of report will be submitted. This task force have yet to complete its work. And as soon as it completes its work, just like the 6 other task force, they will submit a report to EDB, and the EDB would wait for me on how I would respond to the task force recommendation. This simple matter. And during the epidemic, on the enforcement of various regulations, and of course they will be taken by the law enforcement agencies, the police force being one of those, and the other like also the FEHD and so on. And for the 599G, on the banning of group gathering of a certain size, and it should prosecute based on the facts or levy a fine. If the public see that the enforcement agency have deviated from the requirements of the regulations, I welcome them to object or make a complaint, and we shall handle that in accordance with the law. And thirdly, of the situation between the press and the police didn't happen recently. Over the past year, I've been asked this question quite often. So my answer has always been the same. It required mutual respect. The government and the police respect the freedom of speech and the press freedom. And I would like to take the example and try to answer as much question as possible and to attend as much press conference as possible, and welcome media and also the online media previously banned in government press conferences. However, at the scene, especially the protests, and which may turn into riot, it's very difficult to answer on specific circumstances. I took notice and hope that the press and the police force can have a candid and frank exchange and on how do we address any unpleasant situations at the scene. On the 11th of May, the police force have written to 4 media organizations, including Journalists Association, the News Executive Association, and News Workers Association, and the Photojournalists Association. The conclusion stated that they hope they can step up communication and to explore the issues in depth and come up with constructive proposals. And also look forward to this communication, and this exploration will also look into the problems that during the protests what might erupt into riots, which give to the so-called student journalism, child reporters, volunteer journalism, or silver journalists. HKJA said, well, they might not have professional training to cover the scene. Like in my press release said, especially the children. How can a 12-year-old, well, just imagine a 12-year-old child can handle this complicated and ever-changing scene. So why would anyone think this child journalist should arrive at the scene as a journalist? I hope that the police force and the news association dialogue can also look into this question. And today I've asked the Chief Secretary Administration to take part as well. The Chief Secretary have invited at the press and the police force to a meeting to address any common problems. Next question. Second front row. Tai Kung Po. In your interview with Tai Kung Po, you stated that you hope that within this month you can relax the quarantine requirements. So what is the latest progress, and would you consider reference to the mainland practice of using a green QR codes to help facilitate a border entry? And it was mentioned education. The pandemics yesterday claimed that you want to eliminate intermittent criticism and to conduct brainwashing. And would you like to add on general studies? You also talk about the preserving jobs and save the economy. And the Hong Kong Coalition today, we have the press con to talk about avoiding layoffs. And what's your view of the actions of these organizations, and would you be beneficial for the government? Thank you for the 3 questions that require a detailed answer, though I will not able to stay because the EXCO is waiting for me. So these 3 questions are important. First, on cross-border quarantine arrangements. In the past 3 or 4 months, we have 2 strategies in fighting the epidemic. First is to compress the people flow out from Macau and the mainland, and 2 is to minimize social interaction. In the past 2 weeks, we have announced certain measures to ease the social distancing measures. Now is time to look into any potential room to ease the border restrictions. Well, this would also so the possibility exists for Macau and mainland and Taiwan. So for all these places, we have done an excellent job in controlling the epidemic. And in Macau, there are over 20 days in a row with no local cases. And also for Taiwan and Hong Kong, and there are only sporadic cases in the mainland, most of them imported. At the same time, cross-boundary people flow is important for Hong Kong recovery and to our livelihood. Thus, on see how can lift the restriction on cross-boundary flow of people. The 2 factors, we can't just lift all the restrictions and allow the free entry of everyone. We must determine the priority. So the priority would only have those have the necessity to cross the borders. For example, they might have a government business or related to the epidemic work or related to our economy. And the second, and in terms of quality exemptions, and how can we ease the arrangements for them? Well, we need to go on 14-day quarantine if we want to get to Shenzhen, and also subject to 14-day quarantine when they return to Hong Kong. That means there are no restrictions. On the end of April, we have amended the 599C regulation. We included 2 categories that could be exempted from the 14-day quarantine. One would be cross-border students. Well, we leave that for today because we need more time to iron out the issues at the border checkpoints, and the trips they made are related to Hong Kong economic interest and or manufacturing or providing professional services which are necessary. So the first priority will be for these group of people. That's why we come and plan earlier that if we had a manufacturing in the mainland and own a factory there, they will be exempted. Today I can announce that the same exemption applies those to other business areas or for other professional services, for example, lawyer, accountants, or IT, or those who healthcare staff required to provide service in the mainland. They will be exempted under this regulation. So that's the first type of measures and identify which groups to be exempted. Well, the second, I wouldn't call that a relaxation, but other and enhanced arrangements. So that when they're exempted from the 14-day quarantine, they will inspire more confidence that on through virus testing, through mutually recognized virus testing results. If it test negative for the COVID-19, when it showed the proof, they'll be exempted for the 14-day quarantine. So that's something we're looking into, and both sides are having active discussion. That's the health code in the mainland. However, it requires mutual recognition. So which laboratory results will recognize, and from the mainland side, they have to recognize which Hong Kong lab results. So when they cross the border, will hopefully they will use a smartphone. It will allow the immigration officials that this is an exempted person, and also they can provide the negative result for virus testing before they can cross the border. I hope that we can announce the details at the earliest opportunity. However, it will require negotiations between Hong Kong and Macau and Guangdong, so it will require a simultaneous announcement. And third question on education. I will get to the stage that I'm not afraid of criticism or smearing. Like I said earlier, my commitment and enthusiasm for our education is well noticeable in all policy areas. The area that I commit resources to earliest, it was education. As for the education workers, I have shown huge respect for them. And however, education is about character building, and I hope that everyone who works in education can uphold the spirit. I have nothing to add on general studies because it very much depends on the report submitted by the task force and on what the recommendations will be. We did take into account the perception of the public. After all, when the general studies become a standalone core subject, it had been 10 years, and it's time to have a comprehensive review and to look at the curriculum, the intent, can also follow what has been intended. I get the public support, and also whether this subject can nurture a huge learn base and learn about diversity, and also prepare them to tell the sense of right and wrong, and also be a responsible citizen, and also as a national citizen, national citizenship, and so on. That will be considered by the experts. And thirdly, on the Hong Kong Coalition, Mr. Chung and Mr. Leung Ching, the Vice Chairman of the Coalition, and also the Secretary General, have met me, and that was before the announcement. I would like to thank them for letting me know in advance, and also on that joint declaration, I agree to every word of it, especially that in the face of a critical situation in Hong Kong, people should notice that that Hong Kong could not stay on like this. Thus, we have to reset it and revigorate the economy and livelihood and upholding one country system, and a commitment to the rule of law that we have to reset. And while on the work of coalition, the government and myself give the full support. However, we did not take part in this. It is a civilian effort that the government will not take part in this. Well, if some of the work of the coalition would like to, our advice, we're happy to provide them. The work of the coalition, well, for example, they've distributed over 10 million masks over the weekend. We want to welcome them, even though that we have an adequate supply of masks. And we're now to 6 measures to share the masks with the public. But more organizations can mobilize their own strength in providing more masks, especially for the disadvantaged. That I would definitely support. And the coalition works on jump-starting the economy. I don't know about the contents of the press con. If the aim is to prevent layoffs, well, they're very much matched our intent to preserve jobs as to help the recent graduates, to provide them with internship opportunities and so on in this climate is very much welcome, because there's totally dovetail in our work. Well, it really provides an extra strength. Well, in my meeting with Mr. Leong and Mr. Chung, well, it might have to do with the afternoon press con. I told the two vice chairman that the Hong Kong government had devoted 300 billion to save the economy and preserve jobs. And I'm confident of the impact of the wage subsidy scheme, that we can able to control this wave of unemployment, so that the employers would keep these jobs with our help. However, in one area, I made many appeals that didn't have to go near, that on cutting the rent, while the shopping centers and shops would need to show the tenants their commitment to survive the wave together. That's about cutting to rent. So besides the payrolls and other expenses, there will be other rent, which made up a high proportion of the total cost. I estimated that well, there are quite a number of landlords or developers as members of the coalition. Thus, I've asked them to that whether they can make appeal within the coalition to appeal that the landlords, whether big and small, to in this very challenging period to provide some kind of rental relief. Well, it is to happen. Definitely very welcome. Thank you.
In English, I really have to go because this.
Problem with the liberal studies.
Who is asking?
I'm asking the question, RTHK. What do you think is the problem with the liberal studies curriculum right now? And are you planning to substantially revamp or scrap it completely? And also, there's a media report saying that the government is planning to resume the second reading of the National Anthem Law Bill on 27th of May. Could you confirm that? And does that mean the government has already liaised with the chairwoman of this House Committee, Starry Lee, to ensure the committee will pass the bill to the main council by that day?
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you.
I really have nothing more to add on the future arrangement for the subject of liberal studies. This was only one of the areas that the government has identified that warrant a review at the beginning of our term. We started off by creating 8 task forces to look at various aspects of Hong Kong's education system. And one of it is to look at the curriculum. And within this area, I suppose the most talked about subject is liberal studies, because this subject, unlike English, Chinese, or mathematics, was introduced 10 years ago. And there have been a lot of discussions on whether it should have a curriculum, whether there should be textbooks, and how it should be taught in schools, and so on and so on. So I am awaiting the task force to submit a report to the government, and then we'll decide the way forward. But of course, in deciding the way forward, we will have to look at whether the liberal studies subject is meeting the original objectives of creating this subject about 10 years ago. Now, as far as the second reading of bills that have completed scrutiny by the Legislative Council, I can confirm here, in fact, you will know it very soon, that the Chief Secretary and the relevant principal officials have already written to the House Committee Chairwoman, the Honorable Starry Lee, to consult her. This is required under the rules of procedure, to consult her on the resumption of second reading of these bills in the Legislative Council. And there are a total of 10 bills, I think. 2 of the bills have been delayed for a very long time, and they are the National Anthem Bill and the Patent Amendment Bill. So we do expect these 2 bills to be given priority in the resumption of second reading by the Legislative Council. The remaining 8 bills could also take their turn to go back to the Legislative Council for resumption of second reading debate and hopefully passage by the Legislative Council. 多謝晒大家。
Thank you very much.